A retired librarian was threatened with eviction from the fully paid home she'd lived in for over a decade. An ambitious HOA president twisted a landscaping permit into a weapon, smearing her as a squatter. But Cynthia brought someone no one expected, the judge who sold her the house. And just wait until you hear how that one move unraveled everything and justice finally took the floor. Cynthia Mayfield had never been the kind to raise her voice or cause trouble. After 32 years working as a public librarian in Charleston County, she'd retired to a modest blue ranch-style home on a quiet cul-de-sac where the mail still came on foot and neighbors waved without needing to know your name. Her home was her sanctuary, a place filled with books, warmth, and the quiet rhythm of a life well earned. She'd bought the house outright 12 years ago, using her savings and the modest inheritance from her older brother, a Vietnam veteran who always said, "At least one of us should get some peace." No mortgage, no liens, no monthly payments, just her, a garden full of azaleas, and a front porch that caught the sunset just right. So, when the knock came that Monday morning, it didn't even register at first. She was still in her robe, slippers soft from years of use, watering her potted herbs on the porch when she saw the two figures walking up the path. They weren't police. They weren't code enforcement. The man wore a navy polo with HOA compliance unit, stitched in white thread over the chest. The woman beside him held a clipboard, like a shield. "Miss Mayfield?" the man asked, flipping open a folder. "Yes?" "My name's David Horner. This is my associate, Laurel Driggs. We're with the Lakewood Creek HOA. We need to speak with you about the legal status of this residence." Cynthia blinked. "Lakewood Creek? I'm not in Lakewood Creek. That's 2 blocks down." David didn't blink. "Due to a recent rezoning adjustment approved last quarter, this street now falls under Lakewood Creek jurisdiction, and our records indicate your property title has not been verified in accordance with current subdivision requirements." "I own my home," she replied, frowning. David nodded curtly and handed her a letter. "Then this should be no problem. You'll need to present complete ownership documentation within 30 days, or vacate the premises in accordance with Code 14.3c of the updated CC and Rs." Laurel didn't say a word. She just placed a bright pink notice on Cynthia's mailbox and wrote something on her clipboard. Cynthia looked at the letter. It had a gold-embossed seal that looked vaguely official, but no signature, no court reference, no city stamp. The wording was full of phrases like possible encroachment, compliance status, and administrative remedy pending. Her hands trembled just slightly. "This must be a mistake," she said. "I paid in full. My name is on the deed. It's in the safe inside. I've lived here for 12 years. "We don't doubt that, ma'am," David said smoothly, "but we need the proper paperwork to prove it aligns with the updated zone maps. Until then, your status is considered unverified." Then they turned and left like it was just another stop on their morning route. That night, Cynthia sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, pulling up the Charleston Assessor's website. She typed in her parcel number, then stopped cold. Her lot was marked, "Status, Pending Ownership Dispute." Her mouth went dry. She opened her safe, pulled out the thick envelope that held her closing documents, and read through them twice. The judge's signature was there. The tax ID matched. Her name was printed clearly on every line. Nothing made sense. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat in her living room with the porch light on and her document spread out around her like armor, as if proof alone could protect her from whatever had just entered her life. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't a clerical error. It was a move, and she had just become someone's target. By Tuesday, the illusion that this might all blow over had completely vanished. It started with a fresh notice taped to Cynthia's mailbox. Bold red lettering across the top read "Second Warning." Beneath it, a bullet point list accused her of failing to verify her deed, obstructing neighborhood compliance, and ignoring a reasonable grace period. The letter was unsigned but carried the same gold-embossed seal she'd seen on the first paper. Then came the orange flags, dozens of them, staked in the soil around her azalea bushes like a row of silent threats. Each one bore a tiny laminated tag: "Unapproved landscaping, subject to correction order." Cynthia knelt beside them in the dusk, brushing soil from her knees as she stared at her perfectly manicured flower beds, the same ones she'd tended lovingly for years. On Wednesday, a tow truck circled her driveway. Not once, twice. The driver didn't get out. He just drove slow, like he was casing the perimeter. Cynthia stood behind the curtains with a mug of chamomile tea, heart pounding, feeling like a stranger in her own home. That night, she parked her car in the garage and locked the doors, even though she never had before. The next day, her trash wasn't picked up. And on Friday, a neighbor she barely knew, Mrs. Edna Lowell, from 2 doors down, turned away when Cynthia waved from the porch. Later that afternoon, Cynthia overheard Edna talking to someone on the sidewalk, loud enough to be heard. "I just don't understand how someone could live here that long and not have her paperwork in order. Maybe she never really owned it." The source of the whispers? A woman named Marla Sutton, the newly minted HOA president. Marla was a former real estate agent who'd once been cited by the state board for incomplete disclosures. Now she strutted through the neighborhood like she owned every mailbox. She took to the HOA's Facebook page and monthly flyer with cryptic updates about residency irregularities and ongoing investigations into non-compliant residents. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. "She's been flying under the radar for years," Marla reportedly told a group at the community coffee meet. "No mortgage, no title trail, just a signature from some judge who retired the same year. That's not ownership. That's opportunism." And just like that, Cynthia wasn't a neighbor anymore. She was a rumor, a shadow, a question mark people didn't want to get involved with. Out of desperation, Cynthia called the city clerk's office to request a fresh property record verification. She gave her parcel ID, spelled out her name, and offered to drive down with a certified copy of her deed. The clerk paused. "We have a note here that the title's under review," she said, a little too quickly. "It's flagged because the transfer was processed by a third-party judge who retired shortly after. There's no follow-up validation in the system. The audit trail ends with his signature." "But it's a court-certified sale," Cynthia argued gently. "He was authorized. I have the documents." The clerk hesitated, then added, almost like reading from a script, "Ma'am, unless you can provide personal testimony or documentation directly from the signing judge, we cannot verify ownership at this time." Cynthia's breath caught. Her world had narrowed to the sound of a dial tone, and a pink notice crumpled in her lap. What she once thought was a clerical mix-up now felt deliberate, planned. Someone wanted her gone, and they were willing to make her fight for what was already hers. Cynthia didn't cry. She packed a weekend bag, slid her deed into a protective sleeve, locked the front door of her Charleston home, and started driving north just after dawn. No dramatic speeches, no calls for help, just a silent promise to herself that she would not be erased. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, through the noise and humiliation and flyers plastered to her mailbox, she remembered a name: Judge William Renner. He wasn't just the man who signed her closing documents. He was the one who handled the entire probate transfer. The home had belonged to his sister, and he'd sold it to Cynthia after settling her affairs personally. It had been a private sale, a legal one, handled with care. He'd looked her in the eye that day, shook her hand, and said, "You'll take care of this place. I can see that." And she had. 7 hours later, Cynthia pulled into Asheville, North Carolina, past the ridgelines and quiet, winding roads, until she reached a cedar-sided house with a wraparound porch and a wind chime that caught the breeze. She wasn't sure he'd remember her. She wasn't even sure he still lived there. But when the front door opened and William Renner stepped out, she recognized him instantly. His white hair was thinner, his gait slower, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Miss Mayfield?" he asked, surprise giving way to concern. "Are you all right?" "I need your help," she said. "They're trying to take my home." She sat on his porch and told him everything. The fake-looking notices, the rezoning lie, the way the HOA president was using half-truths to smear her name, the city clerk's words about missing records and unverifiable transfers. Judge Renner listened without interruption, hands folded over his knee. When she finished, He leaned back and sighed hard through his nose. "This isn't incompetence," he said. "It's coordinated and malicious." He walked inside and returned 10 minutes later with a leather-bound folder that hadn't seen daylight in years. Inside were certified copies of the probate court order, the deed transfer, the sale terms, documents with his seal and bar number, stamped, dated, and irrefutable. "They're counting on confusion," he said, "but I don't forget the homes I place, especially not the ones with my sister's name still on the original deed." She didn't ask. He offered. "I'll testify if it comes to that," he said. "You don't go after someone's house without going through me first." They spent the rest of the evening assembling everything. By morning, the affidavit was signed and notarized. 3 original filings, one from the probate court, one from the county recorder, and one from the closing session itself, were copied and certified at the local municipal office. Judge Renner even called a colleague in Charleston's courthouse to alert them that something improper was happening on the HOA's end. Cynthia drove home that afternoon with a file folder seat-belted into the passenger side like it was a human being. By Friday morning, she marched into the Charleston County Courthouse and filed a formal injunction against the HOA's claim of jurisdiction, citing unlawful intimidation and fraudulent misrepresentation. Attached to her petition, Judge Renner's signed affidavit, his original documents, and a notarized statement detailing how the sale occurred, when it occurred, and why every piece of it was above board. The court clerk flipped through the folder, her eyes widening with each stamped page. "This is comprehensive," she finally said. "You might want to call a lawyer for the hearing, but honestly, you probably won't need one." Cynthia just nodded, calm but burning with purpose. Because now she wasn't just defending her home, she was coming for the people who tried to steal it. The courthouse was quiet that morning, the way only a government building can be, buzzing with tension beneath polished floors and fluorescent lights. Cynthia sat at the petitioner's table, calm, dressed in navy blue, with a soft silk scarf looped once around her neck. She didn't fidget. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Behind her, seated with quiet composure, was Judge William Renner, retired, respected, and more than ready to speak. On the other side of the aisle, David Horner, Laurel Driggs, and Marla Sutton huddled together. Their posture said confidence. Their eyes said calculation. Marla even laughed under her breath when the judge entered the courtroom, until she saw who stepped in next. Judge Renner's name rippled across the room like a dropped stone in still water. The presiding judge raised an eyebrow as he took the bench and glanced down at the case summary. "Mr. Renner, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Judge Renner nodded. "I wasn't expecting to need to be here, Your Honor." What followed wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It didn't need to be. Judge Renner took the witness stand and delivered his statement with the calm, clinical clarity of a man who had built a life on facts, not theater. He confirmed that the sale of the property had been conducted legally, transferred from his late sister's estate through probate, signed and certified by his hand during his final months on the bench. He produced court-stamped documents with original filing dates, recorder entries, and full compliance confirmations. Then he turned ever so slightly toward the defense table. "And as for the claim that the HOA has jurisdiction," he said, "I reviewed the rezoning records myself. What Miss Sutton is referencing is a landscaping permit modification filed last year, not a zoning change. The permit allows for additional tree planting along the outer edge of the development. It does not, under any circumstance, redraw property lines or authorize oversight beyond existing association boundaries." The room fell still. The judge leaned back, tapping his pen against his pad. "So, what you're telling me is that this entire claim is based on a document that never actually granted the HOA authority over Miss Mayfield's home?" "Yes, Your Honor," Renner said simply. "They've misrepresented their authority." The hearing didn't last long after that. The injunction Cynthia had filed was not only upheld, it was expanded into a temporary restraining order against the HOA, barring them from making any further contact with her until a formal city investigation could be completed. That investigation didn't take long. A week later, Charleston's Municipal Oversight Board announced the results: misrepresentation, targeted harassment, and willful abuse of procedural language. The HOA was fined. David and Laurel were suspended indefinitely. And Marla Sutton, who had once walked door to door promising new leadership, was forced to step down in disgrace. Cynthia was awarded $15,000 in damages, and the Charleston Gazette published a formal apology from the HOA on its front page beneath a headline that read, "Local Woman Vindicated in HOA Abuse Case." But Cynthia didn't care about headlines. She cared about peace. That evening she returned home to find her mailbox cleared of notices, her garden untouched, and a basket of still warm muffins sitting on her porch, a handwritten card tucked beneath the ribbon. "We're sorry. Welcome home." By nightfall, 2 neighbors came by with casseroles. One offered to mow her lawn. Another asked if she needed help repainting the mailbox. It wasn't about pity. It was about respect. And the next day, a package arrived at her door, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a bow. Inside was a bottle of wine and a card written in a firm, slanted hand. "Justice should never need reminding, but I'm glad you did. W.R." Cynthia placed it on the mantel beside her house key and sat back in her favorite chair, sunlight spilling in through the window. For the first time in weeks, she finally exhaled.